Oh, the wooden pens that we had brought up? I don't know. I don't know what.
I saw some out there.
Yeah, you should go and see.
If I could find
Yeah.
who was giving them out.
Yeah, why don't you maybe at the front, like you know? I don't know, like.
This is not set up right. Is there a clicker?
I'm not a tech person, so
Who's the tech people?
he's over there at the back. Okay, so we have a problem with this drive, so I'm not sure. I don't want to touch it.
Oh,
like
okay.
There's a presentation, and we want to put it in here,
Oh,
like
okay.
it's the next one. So, but
So it's still on your stick, is it? It's currently still on the stick?
I suppose so. I don't know.
Oh, didn't want this to open. So one of these?
Okay, I'll show you. Okay.
No, I think I'm okay. No, I'll do that afterwards. Yeah. Thank you.
Is that the only one?
Yeah, for me.
Oh. Are there others that you need copied over also?
No.
Just one?
This one.
So I can eject this.
Yes.
And this one's your first page. You're the first page?
I am.
Right. So I'm gonna start. Sorry.
You want me to sit up here? Or do you want me to sit down and come up?
Just sit down and you can come
Close
up,
that if you need more on that.
and then you can come up. So who's going to make sure that it goes onto the screen?
Sorry, this is the wrong one.
Yeah.
Sorry? This is the wrong one.
Can you hear me, Angus? Yeah, see the guy, there's a guy in the back there? I'm talking, he's waving to you. So he's the guy that'll be.
Second, we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll just have to-
So he's gonna do the switching of
Yeah,
the.
I
Okay.
think it might be all right. How do I look at all the slides at once on this DOS box?
Oswald.
Dirty operating system.
I haven't heard it called DOSBox in a long time. Made me laugh.
Oh, there's still DOS boxes.
Oh, I
They
know.
haven't improved.
I know.
Okay, good. Okay, so just need to make sure that.
Yeah, there seems to be a few blank slides in there. Like I noticed the first one was just some gibberish.
Oh yeah, but that's my that's where I keep my kind of template slides. And
Sometimes it takes a second to catch
yeah,
up.
I know mine is getting really slow now. I had a 11 by 17 power, you know the big ones.
Oh yeah.
I broke it. So I bought a Mac Air. saw the screen, you go to the source side sorter in a second. The other one took a minute. Within a couple of days, it had paid for itself. Yeah, this looks good. So we can start right there.
Okay. And then you can do if you want to go full screen. It's just a little.
Right. Okay. And this works. Are you the tech person for this?
Yeah, I'm actually there'll be another fellow coming up to help, but I'm part of the team.
Okay.
But this is the clicker.
So you're live streaming this stuff?
Yes.
And you're recording it?
Yes.
Okay, so after you finish live streaming it, delete my recording?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't want
You can live stream. I don't want to record it.
Okay.
I don't want anyone taking it. I mean, I'm doing litigation, so.
Okay, no problem. I'll mention it to the lady that's
Okay.
and then because she'll give me a list afterwards which ones are supposed to get rid of, but I'll mention yours for sure.
So we're going to start. Oops. Hello, hello. We're going to start. So Tensei, good morning. Bonjour. My name is Nathalie Kermoal, and I'm the director of the Rupert's Land Center for Métis Research, which is housed in the Faculty of Native Studies. I'm also a professor and the associate dean academic of that same faculty. And for people who don't know what the Rupert's Land Center for Métis Research is, we are an academic research program, and that is specifically geared towards Métis issues, and the goals and objectives of the research center include building provincial and national connections with the Métis community, building research capacity to advance Métis-specific research, and also offer training and employing student researchers. So I would like to start first by respectfully acknowledging that the University of Alberta, and Lister Center is part of the university, is situated on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. And I was thinking about this acknowledgement last night, and I thought, well, this conference will provide some sense of what we mean when we acknowledge the lands of the Métis people. So the Métis Land Rights and Scrip conference is happening today and tomorrow, and we'll be delving into the history and devastating effects of what was called at the time half-breed Scrip on Métis across the province. So this work was a collaborative work. It's not just the Rupert's Land Center of Métis Research who put that together. It was a collaborative work from A to Z between the Métis Nation of Alberta, the Rupert's Land Center for Métis Research, and also the Rupert's Land Institute. So during these 2 days, we'll have a certain number of experts, some Métis, some non-Métis, who will be talking about history, but also scrip/claim issues. And we will also have a sharing circle with Métis knowledge keepers. So the goal of this conference is to, first of all, inform all Albertans of the sorry legacy of Métis Scrip, especially at a time I think is very important, considering that the MNA and the Government of Canada begin formal negotiations. And in November of 2017, the Métis Nation of Alberta and the Government of Canada signed the framework for advancing reconciliation. The agreement acknowledges the need to address the injustices suffered by the Métis in Alberta as a result of the Scrip system, and declares a shared goal to develop a solution promoting reconciliation between the Métis Nation of Alberta and Canada. In August 2018, the Rupert's Land Centre for Métis Research, in collaboration with the Métis Nation of Alberta, published a Scrip booklet, and some of you may have seen it, and we still have copies at the front if you haven't had the chance to have a copy of it. And it was, when we decided to do this, it was to start the process of understanding what happened with the Scrip system in Alberta. So we decided also that it would be important to continue and to pursue this first initiative and to make sure that we would be informing people in a full-fledged conference where we would be able to look at specific cases and also provide details of different areas in Alberta. So I'm very excited about the possibilities the conference will bring in the exploration of the land rights and Scrip outlined in the program. And also, I'm particularly excited by the fact that we left quite a bit of time for dialogue and for questions and commentaries. So we hope that you are here, and that you will use that time in order to ask those questions or make those commentaries. So overall, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, participants, but also presenters in the room and in the adjacent rooms, as well on live stream, because this is live stream through Facebook. And this welcome is on behalf of the Rupert's Land Centre for Métis Research, but also the Métis Nation of Alberta and the Rupert's Land Institute. I'd like to also extend a special thanks to all the regional presidents and vice presidents who have traveled to come here today. So thank you to each and every one of you for responding with such enthusiasm to our invitation. And I wish you a great and fulfilling conference. But before we officially start, well, maybe that was the official start, I don't know. Then we'll start with a blessing by Norma Spicer, who agreed to guide us throughout this conference. Thank you.
Thank you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this conference. We acknowledge that Scrip had a devastating effect on the Métis Nation. It stripped us of our land and tore apart communities and hindered us in preserving our social and cultural ties. We welcome this opportunity to share our history and to acknowledge that this is a time of transition for Métis people as we move forward to self-government. Send us your spirit and be present among us in the mouths of all who speak, in the ears of all who listen, and at the heart of all we say and do. God of love, you are with us in every transition and change. As we enter into this new era with excitement and even some anxiety, we recall your deep compassion, presence, and abounding love. We thank you for the gifts, talents, and skills with which you have blessed us. We thank you for the experience that have brought us to this moment. We thank you for the work of others that give breadth and depth to our own work. Bless us as we gather here to share your gifts. Be with us as we move forward, rejoicing with you and supporting one another. We ask this in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Norma. So we're I'm going to ask Dr. Chris Andersen, the Dean of the Faculty of Native Studies, to give a few remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the conference today. As Nathalie said, my name is Chris Andersen. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Native Studies, but I'm an Arcand from Saskatchewan originally. I moved here 20 years ago to start post-secondary and then just kind of never left ever since, which is like a lot of Saskatchewanites who live in Alberta. The Faculty of Native Studies excuse me, is the only faculty of Native Studies in North America and one of only a handful in the world. And Métis Rights and History is a really important part of what we do in the Faculty of Native Studies. And so I want to wish you all a good day. I want to tell you how happy I am to get in before all the carbs kick in from the morning breakfast that's out there, because people start to get sleepy around kind of like 11 o'clock, just in time for more carbs for before lunch. I just went off keto, so I'm kind of looking at all these carbs like I haven't in quite some time. Yeah, so I want to acknowledge President Poitras. I want to acknowledge the presidents and vice presidents as Nathalie has before me. I want to acknowledge the really, really hard work that Nathalie and Jen and others have done putting this conference together, because as you all know, these things are incredibly complicated to put together. And I just want to end by saying what all of us already know, which is that the Métis Scrip system is a wound that was inflicted by the Government of Canada, and it's a debt that the Government of Canada owes to the Métis people and, frankly, to itself. And with that, I wish you all happy thinking and speaking, and even though I have to run out 2 seconds from now, I will definitely be here all of tomorrow. So with that, thanks, Nathalie.
Thank you, Chris. And I'd like to invite Audrey, President of the Métis Nation of Alberta, to give also some opening remarks.
Thanks, Nathalie. Good morning, veterans, elders, family, friends, everyone. It's great to see you all here. I too want to thank Norma. Thank you very much for your prayer, Norma. Appreciate it that you're always here for us. And I also want to say a great big thank you to Nathalie and her team for doing all the organizing. We all know it takes a lot of work to put something like this together. And I know we had more people than we thought to begin with, so thank you for doing a great job. And I know Nathalie talked a little bit about the Rupert's Land Centre for Métis Research, but I actually want people to understand that, to me, this is only the very beginning, and we have a lot more work that I see the centre doing. So I just want to talk, you know what, it seems like only yesterday when the University of Alberta and Rupert's Land Institute announced the creation of the Rupert's Land Centre for Métis Research. And of course, now it's known in our community as the RCMR. Since the opening on May 31st, 2011, RCMR has been working to establish itself as an academic centre under the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. And it has produced numerous pieces of articles and research to support the work of the Métis Nation, and more specifically, at this point, Rupert's Land Institute. It has also opened the venue for presentations and open discussions on issues that matter to Métis scholars, to artisans, to citizens, and this is done through what is now known as Métis Talks. In addition, at the request of the Métis Nation of Alberta, the RCMR organized, as you heard already, the Daniels Conference, and now the Métis Land and Scrip Conference, and I believe there will be many more to come, because as you can see, this room is full. I understand we have a couple more rooms over there. Whenever we're going to talk about the rights of Métis, our people come in huge numbers. So I can see us doing lots more. And I know this would not all be possible without the support, the partnership of the University of Alberta, the Faculty of Native Studies. Thank you, Dean Chris. Also the Government of Alberta, Rupert's Land Institute, and of course the Métis Nation of Alberta. It takes us all to make things like this happen. So I want to thank all of those who were involved Firstly, in the formation of the RCMR, including the past and present management and the administration of RCMR, including the past and present directors and the members of our Executive Council, who you've all done, I believe, a great service to the Métis Nation in creating this Rupert's Land Centre for Métis Research that is totally helping to move us forward. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come out today. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. That means there's going to be more work to do for our CMR, but maybe for another conference we'll wait a couple of years. Okay, so we are going to start into our program, I think I have a few housekeeping notes. That's what I've been told. So as you have seen, there's some food and coffee and everything in the hallway, so don't hesitate to go and get what you need during the conference. Also, for every time that we're going to have a presentation, there is time for question and answers. And as I said earlier, we did it on purpose because we want people to be able to express themselves. And so, of course, there's this room and then there's the adjacent rooms. So we're going to do it in such a way that we would often start questions here and then we'll move to the other rooms. And then we'll ask if people have questions from the live stream, because we're being live streamed through Facebook, and people who are watching us over there will probably have questions themselves. So these questions will come to us. So of course we are limited with time, so we'll take as much as we can. And in that sense, you'll have to be to try to be succinct and direct in your questions as much as possible. Also, you have volunteers. We're very lucky at the Faculty of Native Studies. Our students, I really love them. They're amazing. And without them, there wouldn't be a Faculty of Native Studies. So, and some of them have agreed to volunteer today and tomorrow. And so they have little badges and they can help you for anything that you need. So just ask them and they'll be there for you. Did I forget anything? Because I forget all kinds of things. All right, so maybe we'll start with our first presenter then. So today we have, we're very lucky to have Dr. Frank Tuff as our keynote. And we decided to, when we looked at the program, all of us agreed that Frank was the person to start the conference, to keynote for the conference. Dr. Frank Tuff is a professor at the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta and the principal investigator for the Métis archival project, which is called, known as MAP. And there's a lab that Frank has built through the years. And overall, Dr. Frank Tuff's academic curiosity and expertise has focused on three distinctive pairings: history and law, history and geography, and history and economics. But he's also very well known for the research that he's done on Scrip. And I would say that in Canada, he's probably the expert on Scrip. Along with academic research, Dr. Frank Tuff has served as an expert witness in several court cases concerning Aboriginal and treaty rights, including R.V. Morin, R.V. Laviolette, R.V. Bellumeur, R.V. Gooden, which resulted in judicial recognition of Métis harvesting rights. So today, Dr. Frank Tuff, but he's Frank for us, will be, well, you know, we always ask people to try to keep their title short. Well, not Frank. So this is the title. The history of scrip speculation and devaluation is a sorry chapter in our nation's history. The failure of history and law in respect to Métis Nation rights to a land base. So please welcome Dr. Frank Tuff.
Could we dim the lights up front here? There's way too much ambient light to actually see what I have. Under the best light conditions, what I have is rather a challenge. It's copies of documents and things of that nature.
So where do we press over there, here?
Over there. She's got it.
But I meant the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, that's good. You can see it?
I don't use IBM computers, so it's like, so somebody will need to do this.
Yeah, maybe.
Slides are kind of gibberish, so you want to get ahead of those. Is that your first slide, sir? That's your first slide.
No, no. The green is the first slide.
Green? Okay.
And then there, that's the first slide.
Okay.
And
And that's showing up.
how does this work?
Just left and right.
Okay, so this is forward?
Yes.
Okay.
And then back.
And where does it have to, is there any place it has to be aimed?
Nope. Just anywhere near the.
Well, good morning. And as a member of the U of A, I welcome you to the U of A. I'm amazed at how wonderful this is going to be, how organized it is, and how much support there is here. And I have to thank Nathalie for the kind words. She has identified me as Canada's expert on Scrip. Jean, once in a large Métis group, identified me as the world expert on Scrip. And I feel in terms of the hierarchy of the Academy, that's not far from being the world expert on irregular Portuguese verbs. Some of you will recognize that reference. So yes, I've been working on this for a while. There's some information here that helped form us from our CAP. Ron Bourgeot, who worked for AMSIS, was one who got me really thinking about Scrip and the challenge of that as a topic. And no, it's hung here too. Well, I suppose this is the government's claim map. It's a bit dated. It has Inuit and First Nations claims. I think what the idea here is and what the theme of the conference is to put the Métis on the map. Thank you. A disclaimer, I'm not like all the other objective value-free professors on this campus, but I was engaged for the Northwest Saskatchewan claim. I have been a witness, and I am the PI on that claim. This is a picture that Jason took. Some of you wondered, well, did he escape? Did he get convicted? But sitting here often there's a profound sense of alienation, actually. And then here is from an order that was sought that wasn't got. Professor Toft, researchers, contractors, undergraduate, graduate, postgraduates working in association with under the direction of Toft, the research team, are precluded from testifying or presenting evidence relating to the matter in question in this action. This was from the Justice Department, and I guess this sort of in a way is a backhanded compliment. We must be doing something right if we're not allowed to talk about it. Now, there has been some claims work done, specifically this. It rose out of the claims process many decades ago. This is quite good, but it doesn't get at what I think are some of the crucial issues. And out of Manitoba came Doug Sprague's work. I think Doug Sprague's work is not really acknowledged. He had a great deal of difficulty getting this published. Another publisher begged off at it after a contract. But he is the one that broke the intellectual consensus on the sort of legitimacy of how the Métis were treated in Canada, specifically with Section 31 land grants. It's Sprague that really did it. And I was quite pleased to have had a few conversations with him. So Scrip documents, how can we get away from that? Lucie Janvier's application, which is, I think is really the only benefit the Métis have gotten out of this system, 2 pages and a page of witness declaration. Other people will be speaking about these and the utility of these. This is a check-off thing, or checking to make sure she's not double dipping. An issue order. This has been what was sort of our focus, is a kind of forensic approach to the archival record. So this is received. What's missing in this particular display is, of course, the certificate. Here's a couple of receipts signed by some high up in the Liberal Party who was there to collect the coupons. It's all tracked in registers. This is the claim register. This is what the coupons look like. This is called Scrip coupons. It's not called Scrip, it's called Scrip coupons. Got to keep these distinct. Endorsed on the back by Louis Morin. 2 coupons, 240 acres, Louis Morin. We've had other ones where we've databased the backs of the coupons, and there's this guy, Les Bronze, who's just hanging out in Dominion land offices waiting to identify Métis. And this is the delivery register. Okay. Well, transfers, how about that? Yeah? Some transfer stuff in here where the rights of the land are transferred. It ends in some respects with a letters patent. This is the document that creates the title that is then registered locally. It's issued from Ottawa. So the Métis could theoretically get Scrip in the area that was part of the Dominion land system and that was open for homesteads. Okay, that was the restrictions on it, which is only about half the land that's there. It starts with the Northern Council. There's about 125 orders and councils relating to Métis entitlements. This often defines the scope of the commission. What we've done here for land script, and almost everything I'll be saying here is about land script, it doesn't really apply to money script, is we've broken out the process as part of this forensic approach. And we're concerned about, the key issue here is the location of the script. What can we learn about that? So Lucie Janvier lives up at Portage, Lavache, and she went down, if we're to believe this narrative, to Moose Jaw. She's probably itching to go to Moose Jaw. To locate her land scrip. Okay. I lived in Saskatchewan for 14 years, and I come here to make jokes about it. It's not nice at all. In the Royal Commission stuff we did, we started reconstructing the paper trail. So this shows Ottawa. This is a file. This is all the documents. This is what's happening in Fort Churchill. This is Jane Alston. This is it being located out in the Peace River country. This is her children. It's going to a Royal Trust Company in Winnipeg. So we started doing these. These were very laborious. And then we have other ones here, Baptiste Sylvester and Prince Albert, Port de Lage, how the paper's flowing around, right? So they sent out these commissions. This is some photographic records from the 1901 commission in the Green Lake area. Just flying on the road, right? Wasn't hard. Bump into someone, stop the...
Would you please speak from the lectern?
Well, no, I can't see it.
You have a monitor right here. They can't hear you in the other room.
Oh,
'Cause you're,
you don't have a portable mic.
we would lose a Q&A mic if we...
What about one of those mics? No?
They're wired.
Yeah, but I could stand closer to it.
Sure, yeah, if you could...
I can't, like from there, I can't see. If the podium was set up here, it'd make more sense to me. Okay, sorry about that. So, showing up at Duck Lake. This is the commissioner's tents for taking Scrip in 1900. It's one of my favorite photos of the Scrip process. Eno Cote, these were the government commissioners. Eno Cote was very high in the Dominion land system. Started in 1879, retired in 1931. His hands are in all of this stuff. So we reconstructed where the commissions had gone when, doing very basic research. So Métis land and Scrip grants, land grants and Scrip grants, not the same thing. Red River, blue, adult money, children's supplemental, money Scrip, the stripes, the solid red, land Scrip, the stripes. About 5.4 million activity events. This is the money and land breakdown. After 1900, the money land breakdown is higher. It's more important. So we've been doing this basic sort of stuff. There are, and this actually kind of infuriates me, maybe because I am Canada's expert, but people are conflating it, okay? Métis lands are not Scrip, and Scrip is not land, okay? So let's stop conflating the two. And let's refer to them as entitlements, okay? As entitlements. I think that's the operative word. Section 31, 1.4 million acres, land for children. Adult money at Red River, Dominion Lands Act, units of 160, Children's Supplemental, Northwest Children's Scrip, Northwest Adult Scrip, Treaty 11 cash grants. They come in various forms, right? Now related, but not based on Indian title, Section 32 lands, I think very important, and other lands occupied and claimable under the DLA. They're not all the same thing. Got to stop conflating them. Well, speculators, right? This is a cartoon. I didn't draw it. But there's some irony or offense at the buffalo. And this is another big buyer of Scrip. Transfers, you say. They're executed in blank. We find stuff executed in blank, right? But it's signed. More of them. Would you do that today? Someone hand you a piece of paper, you're transferring something of value, and it's not filled in, and you would sign it? In the post-NRTA period, there's this little interesting issue that develops. But what happens is a deputy minister with a law degree has a look at it, and at the documents. The quit claim from Catherine McLeod is imperfect in several respects. It is not dated, no seal has been affixed, appears to have witnessed it, the affidavit, though signed and purporting to be sworn by Horst Hallecrow, is in fact in blank and therefore of little value. Okay? So this is not some academic making an assessment. This is an assessment made at the time. Appears obvious that the quitclaim deed was executed in blank and filled out at a later date. Obvious to him, right? But of course, he's a lawyer and he has many arguments, and he explains why we should accept the quitclaim deed anyway. Right? Look at this. McDougall Secord. Farmlands and half-breed scrip for sale. Even makes it to the letterhead. Lists. Eh? Lists. The Rondells. Antoine. Remember that name. Tallies. 19,000 acres. 29,000 acres. Okay. That's the background. What's the research problem? How do we expect this as a research problem? So the challenge here for the Métis in these communities was unextinguished Aboriginal title, and the scrip system was a sham. Hello?
Oh, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that, folks in the other room. History of scrip speculation, devaluation is a Surrey chapter. You know, this is like a mea culpa, right? Sort of yes, but let's get on. And they actually used this to drive a wedge between Indian and Métis. Well, what's missing here? Is this all there is? Is it all about the price of scrip and then it was speculation? How about the honor of the crown? Are we dealing with that in the scrip system? Sharp dealings? I've never seen a Métis case from the Supreme Court that has made reference to sharp dealings. Anything nefarious with respect to First Nations land, that term is often used. Well, how about fraud? Is fraud happening? Well, a good start is W.P. Fillmore's article in the Manitoba Bar News. And he had been articling in about 1906 and went up to Illicross and bought scrip. Okay, so there's probably not many chances for articling students to go off and participate in the purchasing of scrip, but he did it. But it's troubled him. Okay, so he's doing this in 1906 and he publishes it in 1973. Okay, it would have matter of a great considerable difficulty to north find the person named in the scrip and bring him out to the land office. He worked for a firm that specialized in moving this paper. The holder of a scrip to pick out some local Indian or half-breed and take him to the Dominion Lands office and present him as the person. Why not? All the pages have been executed in blank. Just fill in the details. Well, what do we call this? It's impersonation. It involves forgery. It results in fraud. Now, I actually have the original manuscript of Fillmore, and it is a letter from an articling student who did a real lame job of doing some research for Fillmore. He sort of went to the Manitoba Archives. It's too bad he didn't know about the Canadian sessional papers. It's too bad he couldn't help out Fillmore's memory with some of the basic context of the script. But Fillmore, is not sort of ne'er-do-well. He's a lawyer's lawyer. He's on the bar, important positions. And in fact, he lived quite a while, so that article in 1973 was not a deathbed confession. So, can the allegation of widespread fraudulent use of land scrip be investigated? Okay. In other words, did Fillmore surmise correctly? Now, there's a lot of challenges here. There's not going to be any witnesses to say, yes, this happened and it was fraud. This is going on. What sort of records are they going to keep about this nefarious activity? But we took on that challenge. So the real hinge of this on land scrip is the rule of location. Must be located by the Métis grantee, can only be assigned or conveyed after location, and must be an adult. That's the gist of the rule of location. So what we ask here is compliance with the rule of location. Ooh, those new batteries really work well. So this is it. Entry for land must be declared, scrip must be owned by the half-breed is issued to. No assignment of the right of scrip is recognized, but after the half-breed land scrip has been applied to the land, the right land may be transferred. That's because there is no land. There's no legal description to make any sort of transfer, right? It has to be located. So we have doubts. Fillmore's is our hypothesis. What would establish whether or not impersonation occurred? There's three possibilities: signature discrepancies, coupon delivery and possession, geographical distances, descriptive sources. Lucie Janvier, this is her signature, her X. This is on the receipt. This is applying for Dominion land. She's up the image of her X. The very next day, she went home and studied, and now she has a signature. So all this involves the tedious work of databasing, using register data, observations. This is from British Grandin, writing to senior people, Deputy Minister of Interior, 1904. Everyone knows that thousands of land script have been located without the presence of the half-breeds. Someone in authority is telling someone in authority this is happening. This is a Mountie, Sanders, up in the Northwest, and he says, you hear them from everywhere. Oops. Everywhere. The missionaries, Hudson's Bay, and others. The manner in which script has been handling the right of the country for some time. Okay, I think it would be missing my duty not to report so. So he reports it. Then the Department of Interior gets back, says, well, you know, impersonation's not likely, and we're diligent. That's what they replies back, that they're diligent, right? And of course, then the senior to Saunders says, you know, regarding your letter, you'd be good enough not to obtain taking any further actions in this matter until instructed. He wasn't instructed, okay? And Sanders was not the sort of person that would have empathy for Métis. Wasn't his nature. Graduated Royal Military College, fought in '85, not good enough, fought in the South African War, commanded the Calgary Northwest Mounted Police, retires. He fights in the First War. He's mentioned, dispatched by Winston Churchill. He's an archetypical British imperialist, and yet he saw something wrong, right? Well, the distances to the coupons are quite significant. We actually went down and figured it out by the least biased way. I mean, it's the average is over 1,000 kilometers, right? The coupons, by and large, were not delivered to the grantees, okay? Only that little bit of brown is actually delivered to the grantee. And that was very late in the game, they changed the rules. This is a much larger set of coupons, over 12,000, financial institutions, right? So they weren't in possession of the coupons. That's why it's important to make a distinction between coupons and scrip, right? It's very important. We can map all this out. Calgary, Edmonton, we can map it down to the lands that exist today. Here is one for Portage La Loche and where they would have gone. Moose Jaw was really on their horizon. Calgary. Northwest Saskatchewan, when we look at the land script, the white part of the pie, 97%, they didn't get much of that pie. This is an empirical fact. It's not an impression, right? It's a fact. Okay, so the thing is that the Métis pushed back, especially in Alberta, and thank you, because you created records, you didn't get justice, you created historical records, and it's given me something to do with my spare time. So what happens in 1913 is through a lawyer, the Rondeaux say, we didn't get our coupons, give us our coupons. We want them back. And they initiate an action in the Exchequer Court, which is the equivalent of the federal court. They have the numbers, and their lawyer is Edwards. And they maintain that they did not locate the script themselves. And they argued that the response to all this is that the department could not be held responsible for subject actions taken in connection with the script. Okay? Court decision go their way, chattel, tardy afterthought, they waited too long. There was two decisions. Chattel, tardy afterthought. So they decide to appeal to the Supreme Court. And they write the Deputy Minister of Justice, and they tell him various things. For example, Antoine Landrel, being signed before the Dominion land agent Moose Jaw, Antoine swore positively he never was at or near Moose Jaw, not even near Moose Jaw, right? Okay, and no one would forget being in Moose Jaw, right? And no one would deny being in Moose Jaw, right? You would brag about it, right? Okay, so there's evidence that that wasn't him, okay? Solid evidence. So Edward says, the circumstances surely show the script has come into the hands of the Crown in due course, but on the contrary, through a course of fraud and forgery impersonation. And I believe that. And he tells the Deputy Minister. So what they do, what the Justice Department do is they contact their lawyer, and there's some back and forth, and you know, we have this oh, it's hung again. My fault. Okay, so forgeries, okay? The Crown's own counsel tells them that this stuff was forged, right? And so they have to decide what to do, and they want to quiet the appeal. They don't want to go into the Supreme Court, pay a nominal fee. But there's a very important quote here that their Crown counsel tells them, Landry, an Edmonton lawyer, I may say personally that should the supplicants in this case succeed before the Supreme Court of Canada, there would not only be hundreds of thousands of cases of a similar nature brought at once if the fiats were given, as there is no doubt that there were more forgeries and potential extent of impersonation and script in Western Canada than you can realize. Okay, so the Deputy Minister of Justice knows. And he writes a letter to the minister, right, to authorize the payout. And he informs them, you know, that we don't think the judge actually got it right. And the script was admittedly tainted with fraud. And to pay out, to quiet the appeal with some cash. And that's what happened. The appeal was quieted. So what we get there is the Justice Department agreed the script was tainted in fraud, and they were concerned about a snowball. So here's another response. So they tried that. They tried a case against the Crown. They then tried a petition in 1920, again coming from Alberta, helped by a man by the name of Calhoun, and all about unscrupulous speculation, criminal activity, and a bit of ranting. The Interior responds to the petition is given to James Lougheed, right? Or it's given to the Prime Minister and it's given to James Lougheed. Okay? They respond and they basically say that they're diligent, right? They check the documents closely. And it's not for us. And there's actually, they're covering up the fraud of a public asset, homestead lands, that were being fraudulently obtained. They're covering that up. And they're writing back to the Métis, which is in fact is a lie, because everyone knows, to quote Leonard Cohen, everybody knows, that it's fraud. High up, Justice Department. So then there's a complaint against Secord. And one of the things the Interior Department did, okay, so they tried a case against the Crown, they tried a petition, and now he says, well, if there's any fraud, go to court, right? Well, they took that as a green light. And they swore out a complaint, focused on the rule of location, and that there was forgeries, contrary to the Criminal Code of Canada, against a Richard Secord. And a woman testified, Flora Taylor, that she impersonated Elizabeth Hilsup because she thought Elizabeth was dead. And that's on testimony. So now we have a person admitting to doing it, not knowing really what they were doing per se. So there is a report of committal. There is to be a bail of $5,000. Wow, that's a lot. But he could afford it. So, but what does the criminal code have to say about this stuff? Well, impersonation with intent to property, it's kind of serious. Any document forming the title, any entry in any register, any document registry of any such deeds. You see why we're databasing these records? Right? Any power of attorney. Any script in lieu of land. It's in the criminal code. And it was in the pre-Confederation criminal codes. So it's not a chattel, right? And in some cases, liable for imprisonment to life. right? Or 14 years. I wouldn't want either. And on and on. Well, I know you're worried. You don't want to see Richard Secord go to jail. Okay? So steps up Sir James Lougheed, senior Conservative minister. The dying days of a parliament, the criminal code is amended. It's amended in the Senate. It's amended to put a time limit on scrip frauds. It was an oversight. 3 limit on scrip frauds. Well, in the Senate debate, one senator says, what is this all about? The intention is that a prosecution for an offense is not brought within 3 years of date of commission, then it is prescribed. There's no provision in the code at present. So it's the problem of limitations, the problems of evidence. That's what they're saying. That's what they said when that happened, but it changes, though. Okay, so he asked another question. This brings into Section 1140, which deals with limitations. There have been 1 or 2 cases brought going back 20 years claiming that fraud was committed. Of course, the evidence's connection with them would have disappeared years ago, right? Yeah, it really disappeared. You got it up on the screen. So the Minister in Justice endorsed this amendment. And what happens later is Lougheed has this letter, but it isn't revealed till much later. The Parliamentary Council, Brisbane, provides the rationale, but he doesn't use it in the first time. He uses it later in the Senate. The object of this clause is to provide prescription, blah, blah, blah. It is urged that there was a good many irregularities amounting to fraud and perjury in connection with the location of these lands, and parties are racking up these frauds for the purposes of blackmailing. Well, that's a little different than an oversight. So who are they protecting? They're not protecting the people that have been frauded. Canada has amended its old laws to protect the rich at the expense of the Métis, and they're worried about someone rich being blackmailed. Well, if you actually delved a little bit closer, I continued the forensic trail, and there's a little side note here because of this wonderful trail created part by Métis. And what the Parliamentary Council says, I do not intend to answer this. I had no initiative at all in connection with legislation. I merely stated in the letter, in my letter, later, the letter that I was told. The Parliamentary Council was told to do that. Well, I wonder who told them. Okay, so criminal offenses, limitations, evidence disappears. And so the argument is this doesn't really affect Secord because it's not retroactive, right? And lots of wonderful ways of legal stuff. Well, to your relief, the charges against Secord were dropped. Surprise, surprise. So this actually aggravates a lot of people. The Post-Criminal Code campaign, there's a great outrage. The United Farmers of Alberta, Labour, they were outraged because of the unelected Senate, right? At this time, the populist movements opposed the undemocratic character of the Senate. And so they saw this as an outcome of that situation. But there was an election in 1921, and all of the Alberta seats, the Unionist Conservatives lost every seat, and they were won by people on the center left, and one of them was a man by the name of Kennedy from Edmonton. He gets in, and he introduces a private member's bill many times to undo what Lougheed had done. And this creates documentation. And one of them is a Department of Justice opinion. And the opinion, what this opinion does is confirms the scrip fraud, right? Again, the scrip fraud is being confirmed. Oops. So I'm closing. Well, what happens in this? This guy who had sponsored, helped the Métis out, Lafferty, with the petition, a man named Calhoun, he goes bonkers, and he starts petitioning. And he is really, really annoyed. And this is it here. I'll read it out now. On the 27th of May, 1921, you, Sir James Lougheed, introduced in the Senate an amendment to the Criminal Code which broke that treaty with the half-breeds just as much as Germany broke her treaty with Belgium, and which caused the Great War, in which some of these half-breeds were defrauded of their scrip, participated and fought in the dead of the country. Moral argument, right? And it's tarring Lougheed with being the Hun, right? It's a big insult. Had it been some ignorant, penniless half-breeds that had been committed this offence, would the Senate of Canada have invested itself at yours and Gisborne's solicitations in procuring an amendment to help the poor half-breed? To cite an instance, the half-breed not long ago in court here was accused of stealing $2,000 worth of goods. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 5 years in Prince Albert, Alberta. This is very much on point here. The Calhoun is able to point this out. There's two systems of justice here. Now, for some 2 years afterwards, Mr. Score was accused of uttering forged documents obtaining for 240 acres of land. This penalty for this offense had been found guilty of life imprisonment. Magistrate sent Mr. Secord up to trial. Judge released him 5,000 bails. The Senate steps in, passes the amendment, purges Secord of all his criminal, notwithstanding that the land got is now worth $18,000. I don't think so, but anyway, might as well make it a big number. And a poor half-breed on $200 transaction. Justice is not blind in Canada when the Senate, moved by you, sir, importuned by Mr. Gisborne, will make her see. Now, Gisborne didn't really like this references to him in this petition. It is the sole province of the Senate of Canada to cover up colossal frauds and ambiguous transactions and protect money men and big interests charged with criminal offenses. It would seem so. Do you not believe it's about time for you to desist from throwing a monkey wrench into the wheels of justice and let the legal machinery run smoothly in the future without protected by amendments and persons who should have stood before the bar of justice the same as any other democratic government? So this really doesn't work. The impersonation takes that out. Why were they doing this? Why did they set all this convoluted stuff? The price of the land and the price they bought the Scrip for. So school lands, an average of school lands is $14 an acre, $17 an acre in Saskatchewan. It was the gain that could be made on these coupons. We've actually mapped out the land Scrip, the intensity of it. You can see it's clustering. That's prima facie evidence of speculation. Doesn't always work. Secord and McDougall actually bought up every spare homestead in this township, but it didn't go anywhere. They thought the train was coming. And so speculators don't always make big. So what are we looking at? How are we fitting Métis entitlements into things? The red are the Red River claims. The green are the Northwest claims. It all fits into land markets, externally driven land markets, migration. Red is what's happening with the big boom in Winnipeg. And green is the turn of the century, the big boom in land in Western Canada. So one might want to look at the flow of paper, and everything looks good if you're kind of superficial. Homestead lands go to Métis grantees, Scrip buyers. But the flow of property, which is fundamentally a question of political economy, you have homestead lands go to Scrip buyers and become commercial lands. It is the privatization of a Crown asset, simultaneously dealing with the Métis. I want to acknowledge that, like, I couldn't do this without lots and lots of people who've gone through the labs, lots and lots of students. This happens to be Raylene Whitford. And also, I could not do this without Clem Chartier, President Chartier. I need to mention that. It is his legal thinking that started the legal theory around rights litigation. Whether you like it or you think it isn't a priority, it doesn't matter. It's him, and he sort of paved the way, and other people have done amazing work. And also, he funded, right? The Métis Nation of Saskatchewan funded the matrix research. Hopefully this is a much better way of going, but hopefully it doesn't sort of trummel the story about Scrip. So this is what I wonder. I'm there defending the Constitution against the government. Why doesn't my own government defend its own Constitution? This becomes a great deal of angst and existential problems. Okay. Wow, I ended up short, but that's really the short version of this story.
So thank you very much, Frank, for this presentation. So we're going to, we have some time for questions and commentaries. So we will start with this room, and then we'll go to the glacier room. After all, we're in Alberta. And then we'll go into the Facebook or online questions. It's a lot to digest, I know. So there are, like, I see there are like microphones, so if you can go to the microphones and ask your questions or make your comments.
Okay, I was just wondering what a land patent is. Is that a script or is it a coupon?
No, neither. Neither, and it's a very important question. A letter patent is from the Crown. It can be for various things. And in this case, it means, remember the lands, prior to 1930, the lands were administered from Ottawa. There was local administration, but the power rested in Ottawa in the lands patents branch of the Dominion of the Department of Interior. And once everything was in order, and in the case of the Métis, not such an order, a patent would be issued for 160 acres of homestead land. That's what the homesteaders got, and that's what people obtaining homestead lands through the Scrip system would have got. And that letter patent, copies are kept in Ottawa, a letter patent, and would allow the registration of title locally. So eventually land title offices were set up in Western Canada, because land is municipal, property taxes are municipal, and they'd be registered there. So Scrip was a means, and one of our students, Kevin McLennan, he really, because like, if you can't explain that, if you can't be satisfied with the explanation that, well, Scrip didn't create a land base. So you're left with the question, well, why did they do it, right? Which is more than a legal question. And it has to do with, I think, creating an event for land in the market as opposed to the situation where things are fairly restricted through the homestead system, or you've given half the land to the railway companies.
So was a land patent a method of payment?
No, it was a
on
method
behalf of the government to an individual?
I wouldn't call it a payment. It's a recognition and confirmation of a right in the land, to a particular parcel of land. It's like a certificate of title, right? If
So
you
that-
own a house in the city, if you own a house, even with a mortgage, you have proof of ownership, right?
So did stuff like that occur like much later, like in the 40s?
No, because after 1930, the lands are administered by the provinces and not through the Dominion. So they would have their own instruments, and Alberta had the possibilities of getting homesteads, I think, even until the 1960s. So however the province administered that, I'm not sure. Right?
So that would have been a provincial decision and
After
not a federal?
1930. Yeah,
After 1930.
But what's
Okay,
interesting is, after 1930, the way the federal government and provincial governments usually went along with it, recognized that Scrip was an obligation on the part of the province. So if someone showed up with Scrip, even though it was after 1930, even if there weren't homestead lands, there was, in effect, a constitutional obligation to deal with that Scrip. So it makes it very interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Louis Belrose. I'm from the Peace River country. 100 years ago, 105 years ago, Treaty 8 was signed in my hometown, Greward, Alberta. And my grandfather sat with the Métis side of the signing of Treaty 8. And as a Métis, he got the same thing from the Queen, an RCMP in scarlet, a cigar, like you mentioned, and a $100 bill. The Métis was on one side with the tents, and the road went in the middle. The Treaty 8 side was one side, and they got all equal amount of recognition that day. Métis are humorous people. We talk Cree, and Cree language is very, very humorous. There's no swear words, But anyways, my grandfather was the leader of the Métis, and he got the $100 bill, the cigar, and the RCMP. Each RCMP in scarlet for each tent. Now this was a big do. This was a historical Treaty 8 signing. So when he got the $100 bill, he rolled it up, and they had a little fire in front of the tent, and he sat there, and he lit his cigar with the $100 bill. Now that scared everybody. You know, you don't do that. That's probably around $1,000 then, eh? Lots of money. And they asked him why he did that. And he looked up at the man in scarlet, the RCMP, and he said in Cree, I want to see how his face turns. I'm going to ask you, Frank, I know you've been working on this, and I really appreciate your work. I met you in Winnipeg once, and once in Saskatoon. And I always appreciated what you're doing for our Scrip and Métis rights. I'm going to ask you a question, probably it would take probably 10 lawyers to answer. But you've been at it a long time, and you probably have a good answer. The question is this. I know, like, we're on Papastis's land, and that's been ongoing for many years. And there's so many buildings here, I don't think they'll trade us for teepees very soon. But what would be the best way to get our rights? I know we have lots of rights. That's been recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada. And what would be the best way to get our land back that's been stolen fraudulently, like you said? And I always want land. If I ever, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a land claim in for the north shore of Lesser Slave Lake. That'll include Fort Vermilion right down to Athabasca. The reason why I'm doing that is my dad told me the highways are the rivers. And that's where the surveyors moved in. And they're called river lots in our country. And that's how they traveled. Dogs, horses, and rivers. So that's why all these river lots, our scripts, are in that area by the water. But what would be your idea or your people's idea to get our land back? The best way, of course, is through the courts, but it might be 200 years old before we get a piece of land. So what would your idea be to try to get legally some of our land back that was stolen?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I'm sure, like myself, everyone in this room appreciates you recounting your grandfather's remembrances of Treaty 8 at Gerrard. And I hope that those are written down somewhere so that they will last forever. Well, there's basically two potential patterns, like you say, going to court, litigation, which, as you know, could take a long time and probably can't happen until the research gets finished. And the second one is negotiations. And the problem with the original land claims policies was that there was no space for Métis. With, I would say that generally, I mean, there's been a couple of real dumb moves, but by and large, I think when we look when the claim was filed in Northwest Saskatchewan back in '93, there was very, very little. I mean, there's no real Métis-specific law, and generally, it's gone in the right direction if it's handled in the right way. So the big barrier that has to be dealt with in, say, a claim outside of Red River, and the MMF has dealt with that, is the Calder decision, which says clear and plain intent to extinguish publicly in the public records. That's why the orders in council are so important, that intent is clear and plain. It could be end of argument. And that's why we have focused on the sharp dealings and the fraud as a way to counter that. But nonetheless, there are all kinds of problems with a claim, limitations, latches. You know, why are you guys waiting till 1993? Why are you waiting till 2018? And so I think that a preferred way would be a negotiated settlement. But I think, and I've seen this in Northwest Saskatchewan, people aren't sure what that's going to look like. And I think there has to be some talk about, is it, you know, what is the form of the settlement? Assume the settlement comes about, what is the form? Is it all cash, per capita cash? Is it land? Is it some land? Is it land for individuals? Is it lands of different tenures? I think it would be good to start looking at some of these things, looking at some of the, if it hasn't been done, some of the more modern comprehensive agreements and how the land tenure has formulated. So my predilection at this point, because we actually have made in two ways, this is not the first time I've given this presentation, and Jason remembers when we gave it to Privy Council, people from Justice Department, they weren't looking too comfortable. In fact, they told me they went back to their offices at 4:30, imagine that, right? So I think we have a whole host of historical records. I mean, what is, you know, I'm kind of a slow thinking Scot, and when I finally realized just recently, so what we've been doing all along is we're using the Crown's historical records or the Hudson's Bay Company records or a whole category of records that are dismissed as colonial against the Crown today. That's what it comes down to. I mean, we have the community witnesses, we have the elders, we have all this, but ultimately, the Crown's own record is what is undermining the Crown. Not only that, they often have very absurd legal arguments, just on the face of a few facts and logic. So I think that now that we've had this research, it can backstop the negotiation process. And so my favor would be if you can get into a good negotiation process where there is goodwill and not have to go to court, because if the negotiations don't work, you can go to court. But if you lose at court, you lose at the Supreme Court, it's kind of game over, all right? So that would be my non-legal view of things.
Thank you, Frank. Keep up the good work.
Another question here in this room, and then we'll move into the other room.
Hi, Frank. My name is Corianne Prudenmorn. I'm from Lac La Biche, Alberta, Region 1. I'm a proud scripted member of Lac La Biche. I actually have this binder is filled with all the scripted members of Lac La Biche. There's 80-some names in here that I hold so tightly to my heart. And my grandfather, Patrick, was one of them in 1885. And this is something that I've been wanting to talk about for years. I often wondered where this half-breed settlement was, where was it? Where did it come from? We talk about Métis settlements and we talk about what they have, but the Métis Nation doesn't have a land base. Well, I do believe with all the historical ties to the land and our traditional ways, this should be a part of our traditional land ties to the land. When we talk about sovereignty and we talk about the eminent domains of this sovereignty, sovereignty power was not transferable to the provinces of Canada. it was relinquished by our ancestors. And now that you confirmed my theory today, it kind of makes me wonder, what do we do with all these scripted Métis MNA members in Lac La Biche? So what do we, my grandfather bought his land for $160, and I have it in this binder amongst many others in Lac La Biche. And I always said Lac La Biche was a half-breed settlement. And I try to, and I'm also going for my Bachelor of Education as well. So I want to teach what Indigenous worldviews looks like, and this is basically what it looks like. Because we live in two worlds. We have Indigenous worldviews, and we also have Western worldviews, which was colonialism. But this today kind of confirms that we do have history and how our land was taken. So how would we go about, like this fine gentleman just said to me, to us today, how would we relinquish, how would we, MNA members, relinquish our land based on our historical ties?
How would you relinquish or reacquire?
Require, relinquish, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm an outsider. Sorry. I'm an outsider, so take this with a grain of salt. I mean, you have to go through the political process and with legal advice, and you know, there's nothing to stop community people from getting together and thinking these things through. And I applaud your efforts to come to terms with the Scrip system.
Thank you. I have another question. In regards to could we actually use this, like what you're teaching today, as part of our historic history? Because I actually want to do a paper on this too as well for one of my classes.
Well, yes, within reason, we've acquired a lot of documentation, which under certain circumstances we advise people on. And the more you can do, this has been a neglected topic, right? But we see that this is like so many other issues. There's a dark side to this relationship to the Crown, right? Who else's property rights would be treated so fraudulently? And then I think it's fair to say that there was a political cover-up. Yes. Who else does that happen to, right? There's that dimension to it. And, you know, you can see it online because of the special committee of the Senate on Aboriginal peoples, and there was a subcommittee on Métis issues, which diverted itself from land to identity, right? It's a lot more fun to talk about identity, right? Land's a bit more thorny. And yet I went before them, and you know what? They didn't exactly applaud when I explained how the Senate had covered this stuff up, right? And their report doesn't reflect that, but they were very appreciative. They're very professional. These people poked me in private, but they themselves, predominantly Aboriginal, I don't feel they came to terms with what the Senate had done as a cover-up. I don't think it's reflected in there. It's not reflected in the questions to me. So I think there's a lot more work to be done, a lot more dissemination, a lot more writing, accessible writing, the booklets, the Matrix has put out booklets. My problem is actually just finding the time to do it. This is, as I said, this is just a little thin slice of the pie. There's all kinds of things to go down, like why is it the UFA took this up? What is the connection between the UFA's understanding of Scrip, the UN Commission, and the Métis settlement lands? So I think there is a connection, right? And so, you know, the fact that the Métis in Alberta pushed back, even though it may be individuals, it led to the organization eventually, and they pushed back. And the wonderful thing about their pushback is they did it in writing, they did it in the court, and now we have things on record, in the archival records, that would not be there if they just sort of shrugged their shoulders, right? So it's them that's helped create the record. So the more dissemination that can be done, because, you know, this isn't the first group I've talked to. Both so-called settlers and Métis, like, this is new stuff, right? It's a bit of an eye-opener. And they're not particularly proud. And, you know, it takes us down the path of reconciliation, perhaps. We must be very pleased that Lougheed House is advertising for a Métis knowledge specialist. I think I should offer up some of my information on Sir James Lougheed.
Well, I thank you for your wisdom, and have a great day.
I was just wondering if there is a question coming from the glacier room. I have no idea if indeed that's the case, but how would we know that? No? No? Okay. And what about people who are listening to us and watching us? The big eye outside, which is on Facebook. So do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have one question coming from Facebook. This is from Lori Blatz. Her question is, once obtaining land under Scrip, what was the responsibility of the Métis regarding property tax, particularly in the Duhamel settlement?
So yes, this is one of the issues, whether it was obtained by Scrip or obtained through the homestead provisions of the Dominion Land Act. It would be subject to property taxes. If you didn't pay, you would lose it. We know, for example, in the Jackfish Lake area, an honors student, Lorna LaPlante, did her honors thesis on that, mapped it out, and we see the transition from people owning 160-acre homesteads to the road allowances because they lost land in the 30s because they couldn't pay property taxes, which many people did. My mother's father lost his land during the Depression. Right? So yes, there would be that obligation. You're entering into the sphere of private property. Right? So it's a very different land system. Very few Métis actually obtained title to land either through money or land scrip. Very, very few. Wasn't the idea. I hope that helps.
Is there another question from the outside? So we can take it and then we'll come back to this room.
Grace Richards, how can we obtain more information on land tenure agreements?
From Grace Richards, how can we obtain more information on land tenure agreements? I'm going to answer that as if it's modern comprehensive land tenure agreements, such as the James Bay Agreement or the Inuit File Agreement. Those are all, I would say, are online in Ottawa, and there's also academic literature on that. So you can search for academic literature on some of these big comprehensive agreements, assessing the advantages and disadvantages, and you can find the actual agreements. If you go to the Nunavut agreement, it's 600 pages long, and then the legal agreement explaining those 600 pages is 600 pages long. But so you may want to start with the academic literature.
Okay, so we're going to come back in this room and...
Hi, thanks again for speaking to us today. My name is Kirit Chutla, and I practice Aboriginal law with JFK Law in Victoria. And just, I guess first off the bat, I articled not too long ago, so, I think you were pretty hard on that poor articling student in there. So, he's just trying his best. We try our best, give us a break. But, the question I thought was fascinating that you brought up was just the, from an evidentiary perspective, the fraud that actually existed, in these forged documents. So I'm wondering, you showed that some of these documents were pretty fraudulent on its face and were dismissed in the past. So I'm wondering now when you re-examine these, or even just when they're cross-examined and they seem fraudulent on its face, have you had, pushback from from Cross just on some of these documents, or how have you had to basically defend some of these documents when you're bringing them in? Thanks.
Okay, well, I have not testified on the veracity of the documents. We haven't got into court yet. But I can say that it's almost the sort of the shifting signatures of Lucia Janvier. It's almost like it's like an electric shock to certain lawyers. And I think in some ways it's the least persuasive part of the argument, because when we database the stuff, if we do a count, and 95% of it is excess. Right? We have looked a bit at, say, people we know who could sign their name, maybe from census records, other records, and seeing what happens to them. Like, does their transfer stuff, is it executed with an X? There's a bit of that. We see that the case with Eli Roy. I think the stronger arguments, really, the government has made the arguments because they're so bold-faced. I didn't give you all the quotes, and we rushed through them. They're so bold about admitting the fraud. It's admitted on the floor of the Senate. Senator Tariff talks about it, and he says, I don't think we should pass this Kennedy bill. And he explains how it works, and it's what we always thought how it worked. With land scrip, there was an initial payment with the certificate and a promise of a subsequent payment. We've got that kind of process documented in some Hudson's Bay Company records where that's going on, the scrip due bills. And Tariff explains that, how that worked, the holdback, right? And the same as Fillmore, like how do we get a hold of these people? Even if they wanted to comply, how would they get a hold of them? And they wouldn't because it's much cheaper, right? There's an incentive. Transaction costs and not bothering to pay for the second half of the scrip. And, well, who's Tariff? Why would he know anything about this? Well, before he was an MP and before he was a senator, he was in charge of the land board in Western Canada, right? He knew exactly how it worked, right? In some respects, this was common knowledge. So we do get these kind of incidental observations, like Sanderson, the Mountie guy, the imperialist. It's just sort of saying there's something wrong here, right? And from, Anglo law point of view, that's why the criminal code is so persuasive about the punishment for property fraud, right? Property is so central to this system. So we haven't really been tested in court on this stuff, and I think as I said, there's the Crown's own records, the Justice Department's record. So on one hand, the Justice Department is being very frank about the fraud and the need, they said, the need to pass this amendment because it's ancient history and by way of an amnesty, right? That's all there. I don't know how they're going to wiggle their way out of that. And then there's other things like the geographical stuff, like how likely is it Lucia Janvier is going to go down? We have other cases at York Factory where they tried locating their script out in the Peace River country for land around Lesser Slave Lake. This is the last big script commission. And the Mountie there says no one's left the community, right? And so they had to backtrack. Now, so when they got caught up, they would sometimes then back up and find a way of getting the paperwork done. But there's a fair bit of that. So the real challenge is taking that fraud argument, lawyers taking that fraud argument and applying it to the need for a Métis land base today through a negotiated settlement or through the court, right? Thank you for your question.
Okay, so we'll take the last question, and then we'll go for a break.
I'm always bringing up the cases of the settlements that were closed, Wolf Lake in particular. If you want to see a case of fraud, in my heart, I believe that was fraud, even though it was the nation negotiating. These people could not read and write. I look after 91-year-old Maria. She still can't read and write. She X's. All what she knew was you had to move out because of the airplanes, which now sits on the Air Weapons Range, and Cenovus Energy is also there. Did they really know what they were doing? No, I believe not. They were told to go live up in Fishing Lake or go live up in Peavine, and they didn't belong there, so they ended up on the roadside. I have seen and lived the devastating effects of this group of people. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to take a break now, and we'll come back, and there will be other occasions to ask questions or make comments. So a little break until 10:45, and then back on stage.